From the people who say your life has no meaning if you don't reproduce, to the Pope claiming that choosing pets over kids diminishes us and takes away our humanity, the societal pressure to have children is oftentimes stronger than any biological drive one way or the other. While both sexes can and do find themselves on the receiving end of this pressure, the bullying of women in particular to view themselves as little more than incubators really came to its own in feudal society. Because of an intricate mix of religious and secular law which permeated the medieval era, men were considered the primary power holders. While titles and land deeds weren't exclusively limited to men alone, in most cases, it did come down to a matter of male preference at the very least. Whereas a woman would only inherit power of any kind, in the absence of a male in the direct line of succession, or, even occasionally seeing a woman in the direct line being passed over from a more distant male relative. So in that feudal society, you have two concepts which would really stand out. One being the aforementioned treatment of women in general, and the other being the pressure to continue the family line and thus the family's power. When you have that pressure being thrust upon you, and you have no power of your own, the highest aspiration you have in this world is only to provide the next generation of power holders. One of the main precipitating factors in the French Revolution was the degradation of the royal family's image, due to their inability to produce a male heir in what the general public thought was a reasonable amount of time. If you're wondering what the end result of all that drama was, well... But it was the 1800s where things took a hard right turn and saw the role of women get a pseudo-scientific backing. This was an era which saw the rise of things like scientific racism, eugenics, and the modern flat earth movement. This was an era in which anything which sounded even remotely scientific was instantly praised as being factual by a society all too eager to add legitimacy to the utter nonsense they already wanted to believe. If you want the quintessential example of what I'm talking about here, take this quote from Dr. Martin L. Holbrook in 1871.
It would seem as if the Almighty, in creating the female sex, had taken the uterus and built a woman around it.
The 19th century saw an entire culture built around the pseudo-scientific notion that childbirth was a woman's destiny, if not her sole function. That women were uniquely and scientifically suited to be both the providers of life and the instillers of moral virtue. All in an era where being such pillars of godliness wasn't even rewarded with the basic right to vote. And that's as far as I'm going to go into the historical framework of this subject, because this video isn't about history. It's about the present. The ways in which our society still actively perpetuates the notion that your life is incomplete without children of your own. While the women's rights movement throughout the last century and a half have done wonders to advance the notion that there is more to life than reproduction, the fact is that many a church and family still gleefully express the rigid belief that not having kids borders on a betrayal of humanity, and perhaps, if you believe in such things, even God himself. I didn't decide to become child-free until I was older. I didn't really think about it too much. I just assumed I would have kids one day because that's just what you do. I was in my late 20s when I considered the thought that I might never have children, the dread ticking clock we're all supposed to be terrified of. I had an honest conversation with myself about whether it would be so bad. Then I realized no, having kids would make my life worse in so many ways, and that it would be better for the potential child to not be here either. The thought that I would be responsible for all the stress and pain that my child suffered had me wrecked with guilt, and the likely possibility of passing down all the negative inherited traits that I was resentful my parents gave me, it wouldn't be fair. There are so many things we just go along with without giving it much thought. With many things that's fine, but the responsibility of bringing someone into this world is not something that shouldn't be deeply, deeply considered. It's quite a controversial and terrifying thought that by giving a person life, you are essentially also sentencing them to death. I personally have very few rules I try to live by, and even further that I would suggest to other people. But I think this comment encapsulates something which has always been important to me, something which I feel should be important to everyone. Consider your actions and make them deliberately. As a general rule, the universe isn't going to reward you with some special karmic tokens for making life choices which stand counter to who you are and the things you want out of life. How many cheating spouses would there be in the world if our cultures respected the fact that not everyone is cut out for monogamy? How many high school dropouts would have stayed in school if we recognized that not everyone learns at the same pace? How fewer neglected and abused children would there be if we realized that not everyone should be parents? I'm positive that everything I said in that last paragraph makes a certain kind of sense on a purely logical level. So why is it so hard for us to collectively respect other ways of life, even get hostile towards them? I've legit had family members tell me that they hope my birth control fails, and then act shocked and offended when my response was that I would pay for my abortion with Air Miles card, and then take a vacation to celebrate. The audacity is real. Now, who doesn't recognize that as being an objectively terrible thing to say to someone, that you hope their birth control fails? You might as well have said that you hope they get raped. It has a lot of the same robbing someone of their agency framework surrounding it. In this case, I'm guessing they just hope that it's fate that robs you, so you can never find someone to hold accountable for it, which is kind of worse when you think about it. Since it was brought up, as for the abortion part, if you are indeed an advocate of women having any agency at all in this world, and happen to be pro-life, this should demonstrate the eternal importance not only of affordable and effective birth control, but also the importance of having the basic respect demanded when someone tells you that a major lifestyle change is just not for them. And I also need to touch on this for a moment as well. In America, which is widely considered a first world superpower by everyone who's never had to deal with our healthcare system without insurance, pregnancy carries a 1 in 4,000 risk of death. So if you managed to get through my last point and all you had to say was, well, what about adoption? There's one of a million reasons why not adoption right there. And as much as I try to take a firm stance on much of anything on this channel, I am firm on my belief that whether or not a risk is to be taken is a decision to be made exclusively by the person who is to be taking it. At the end of the day, we're talking about choice. What boils down to your ability as a person not only to respect the choices made, but advocate for the right to make these choices in the first place. We're not talking about the end of the human race here. We can easily get by as a species with fewer people procreating. Our planet's population is still growing, and we expect that it will continue until it stabilizes roughly at the end of this century. So why, after decades of societal progress, are we still stuck in the notion that you need to have children to add any validity to your existence? And why are we still incredibly misogynistic about it? I have to take my husband to an appointment to even just talk about getting sterilization. Feels like he's the owner of me. The most frustrating part is that other achievements are completely ignored because you don't have kids, graduating college, starting a business, etc. And these people feel like they have the right to criticize me for not having a baby, when it wouldn't be acceptable for me to criticize them for not having accomplished something I consider important. This is commonplace in the USA, a nation where I can quite literally sneeze COVID in your face right now and legally get away with it because my personal freedom, where I can spend an entire lifetime doing literally nothing but popping pills, but some families will still gleefully give me money because I got mouths to feed. I've witnessed both of these concepts firsthand, and I've noticed them quite a lot. I'm not actually sure which is the more disturbing concept, so I'm going to try to unpack both. I'm not really sure how else to say this, so here it is. No one should have to get someone else's consent for what they do with their own body. I'm positive you can try to be a troll here and come up with some extreme hypothetical example and attempt to prove me wrong, but this isn't an extreme case. I've known a lot of women who have gotten their tubes tied, and I've known many more that were outright denied because they were perceived as too young or they didn't already have kids. I've known maybe 2 men who have had similar issues. It just isn't as common, not even close. I personally have only been pressured to have kids by 2 people, and they've only done so a handful of times. In my family, there hasn't been a child born into my generation, and every one of us is rounding the bend to 40 years old. Each one of us has our reasons, and I'm not trying to imply it's a deliberate choice for all of us, but as for myself, I never wanted kids. I don't want the responsibility, and frankly, I'm disabled. If we're to be perfectly honest here, you don't want me having them either. I've had people tell me that I would make a great father. Maybe it's the fact that I don't believe them, or that I don't really feel like the parenting I do in between panic attacks makes up for the other half of the time where I'm telling my kid, sorry little Johnny, but daddy needs to disassociate right now. The thought of having kids has pretty much always struck me as an objectively bad idea. But with that being said, although I retain no small amount of loathing for the people I have witnessed who never should have had children but for some reason did, I don't think less of people who have kids just because they had them. The point of this video effectively is, you do you and let me do me. I don't feel like that's unreasonable when the only expectations not being met here are ones which we never have a right to impose on another person in the first place. If you're a parent and you just need to have grandkids, it doesn't say much for your parenting style if you can't just be happy that the child you already have is content in life. So maybe what's needed here is a whole conversation about why we have children in the first place. Is it something people just do because they want to, with no thoughts as still lifelong commitments associated with bringing a life in this world and raising it to hopefully be a better person than you were? Is it something we do because we feel so much pressure from society that we don't even examine our own agency in the matter? Would society be that much better if every child born was merely the result of failed birth control and the expectation that men and women would make the best of a bad situation they never wanted or needed to be in? Or should we go back to our first highlighted comment here and push for a society in which bringing a life into this world is a carefully crafted decision deliberately made by mature and consenting adults? Now, I would be negligent here if I didn't point out that there are entire online communities dedicated to people who have had kids and have profoundly regretted it. I really don't know how anyone could argue the objective terribleness of that concept. I think we can go even further and agree that this isn't a situation which anyone, adults or children, should ever be in or would ever benefit from. Most people who find themselves in that abysmal state will still do what's legally required of every parent in this world. A lot of them will go even further and try to be as good of parents as they can possibly be. But how much happiness should people sacrifice just to feed a societal norm, or to meet the expectations of those who don't want any of the accountability associated with the concept? There are a multitude of different ways of life out there. Sometimes people do things that wouldn't be for us. It's my hope that one day we find ourselves in a world where we can celebrate those who make the best decisions they can with respect to who they are and what they want out of life. So thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, consider hitting those like and subscribe buttons and giving me the encouragement needed to keep at this YouTube game. I try to release a video per week about interesting health conditions and cultural topics which don't get anywhere near the level of mature conversation they deserve. And throughout all of this, I try to spread some small bit of awareness. Until next time.